Hey, Lara here. Today I'm going to teach you 3-part breath and neutral pelvis. Coming onto your back, knees bent, lots of space behind you, push into your feet to come down. Once you're all the way there, walk your feet to you, feet at hips distance apart. Fingertips resting on the hip bones, elbows and shoulders relaxed. Starting with the first of 3 movements for the pelvis. The first one is about creating a curve in the lower back. So first, we imprint the lower back, letting the pubic bone lift. Then we arch the lower back, lengthening the pubic bone away from the abdomen. Pubic bone lifting, imprinting lower back. Pubic bone lengthening, arching lower back. So we're going back and forth between not being able to slide those fingers under the lower back and perhaps being able to feel more space. And your hands may or may not literally fit under your back. It doesn't matter either way. What's important is that you're creating that movement in the lower back, that movement in the smaller muscles of the pelvis. Create as much movement as feels good for your body. If you're quite mobile in the lower back, you will want to be more moderate with the movement. If the lower back and hips are more stiff, then you can create more movement. You can go to more towards the end of your range of motion, assuming it feels good. Let's do 3 more. Arching, imprinting, arching, imprinting. And if you wanted to make this more difficult, you could add a block between your thighs. You could do it with your legs up the wall if you were pretty comfortable with it. All right, and then trying to create a curve in the lower back to hold, thinking about the hip bones and the pubic bone being flat like a table. So that skeletally, those hip bones and the pubic bone are the same distance from the floor, more or less. And it depends on the human. Everyone has a different pelvis, so you do what you can. Second movement of the pelvis is which hip bone is closer to which armpit, which side of the body or torso is shorter or longer than the other. So we think about taking the front of the right thigh away from us, lengthening on the right side of the body, shortening on the left. Then we take the left thigh bone away from us, front of the left thigh to the back of the left thigh, left hip bone lengthening away from left armpit, right hip bone shortening towards right shoulder. Right hip bone lengthening, left hip bone lengthening. Front of the right thigh away from you, front of the left thigh away from you. And if you're flexible in the rib cage, you also want to think of those front ribs drawing together and rooting down as you continue to try and keep that neutral pelvis, that lengthening of the pubic bone as you try to take one hip bone farther from the armpit, one hip bone closer to the armpit, going back and forth. Let's do 3 more. And then stopping with those hip bones equal distance from the shoulders. Last movement of the pelvis relates to which hip bone is closer to the floor, which side of the pelvis is closer to the floor. If you're new to it, placing the hands like so underneath the pelvis can be quite useful. Right hand facing floor, left hand facing floor underneath the buttocks. With the pointers and thumbs touching perhaps. And then you can press the right buttocks into the right hand, lifting the left side of the pelvis slightly, and then pressing the left side of the buttocks down to lift the right side of the pelvis slightly. And just going back and forth, trying to crush one hand and lift away from the other, going back and forth. If you feel like you're understanding it, you can get rid of the hands and continue with fingertips on hip bones, trying to cultivate more awareness of where those hip bones are in space, more proprioception. You can also think of this as an action where you're pulling one femur into the pelvis and reaching the other out of the pelvis or out of the hip socket, and then pulling the opposite femur down deeper into the hip socket and allowing the other femur to lift slightly away from the socket. And of course, those femurs are still in the socket. We're not dislocating the hip. That's not what I'm talking about. It's more just a subtle reaching of the knee away from the hip and a subtle pulling deeper of the opposite thigh bone to the ground. And then from here, we stop with the movement. Let's walk the feet closer. Take the soles of the feet to touch and lengthen the flesh of the buttocks towards those feet a little bit. We're trying to lengthen inner groins to inner knees and draw the outer knees back into the outer hips. But if this is new to you, pressing the soles of the feet together evenly, that is the most important priority here. If it's available, you draw the ribs together and root them down, maybe even lengthening the ribs away from the pelvis once or twice. That's a great option. And then arms resting beside you, palms face up. Now we'll focus on the abdomen. With each inhalation, feel the abdomen expanding as though it were a balloon. With each exhalation, feel the abdomen contracting, emptying the lungs. Five more rounds of breath. Abdomen expanding, contracting. Now we'll shift the attention to the rib cage. If you'd like to lift or reach the arms a little higher, or go a little lower with the arms, you certainly can. You'll get more shoulder stretch if you go up higher, less if you go lower. Now with each inhalation, we're going to concentrate on the rib cage. And here we think of the abdomen drawing in and up slightly so that we can isolate the breath to the rib cage a little bit more effectively. With each inhalation, think about the ribcage expanding out to the sides, up into space. With each exhalation, feel the ribcage contracting. Front ribs draw together and root down. You might even feel the back of the ribcage lifting away from the ground as you exhale slightly. Inhaling to expand, feeling the back of the ribcage pressing down, the rest of the ribcage expanding up and out. With each exhalation, feel the ribs contracting, emptying the lungs. And continuing at your own pace, never forcing, straining, or rushing the breath. Just 5 more breaths. Now we'll switch the attention to the upper chest and shoulders. And here we think of the abdomen drawing in and up slightly, the ribs drawing together and rooting down slightly, so that the breath is more isolated to the upper chest and shoulders. Should this breath become agitating in any way, reduce your effort or return to your natural breath. With each inhalation, feel the chest lifting, the shoulders expanding. With each exhale, feel the chest sinking, the shoulders contracting. Inhaling to feel the lift, the expansion. Exhale. exhaling to feel that sinking, the contraction. Ideally, closing the eyes or fixing the gaze. Five more breaths. Sternum lifting and sinking. Returning to your natural breathing. Bringing your hands to your outer thighs, fire up the legs, the abdomen, slowly bring the knees to touch. Rest the hands just for a moment. Now keep the knees touching and walk the feet apart. Outer edges of the feet are parallel. Picking up the toes and spreading them wide. Think of squeezing the thighs together and pulling the ankles apart, trying to lift the arch of the foot while still pressing into the heels, inner and outer toe mounds evenly. Pubic bone is still lengthening, hip bones equal distance from floor. And if you think about pulling those femur bones into the hip sockets a little bit, you'll create more effort or more sensation of stretch depending on your body. Reach your fingertips towards the ceiling, taking right hand to left elbow, left hand to right, pull the elbows apart, and then we do a few elbow push-ups. Elbows lift to the ceiling, upper arm bones sink to the floor. Elbows up to the ceiling, upper arm bones to the floor. 2 more. Good. And then find extension with no tension. By this I mean you can move your neck easily. Take your elbows towards your legs, towards your ears. Let's do that 2 more times. And then either resting forearms on forehead or going over the crown of the head to rest. Arms can rest beside you anytime. Now we'll tie together the 3 parts of the breath we've looked at so far. Big inhale, big exhale to empty the lungs. And then inhaling to fill the abdomen when the breath spills to the rib cage. And finally, breath spills to the upper chest and shoulders. And we empty from top to bottom. Inhaling belly, ribs, and chest. Exhaling chest, ribs, and belly. Again, never forcing, straining, or rushing when it comes to breath control. And just 5 more breaths. With your next exhale, returning to your natural breath, bringing the elbows in front of you, reaching the fingers towards the ceiling, then switching to crossing left hand to right elbow, right hand to left, pull the elbows apart, and then a few elbow push-ups. Good, and then elbows towards the legs, towards the ears. Pulling the elbows apart as you squeeze with the fingers. Thinking about externally rotating that upper arm if you can. Slowly taking those arms overhead when you're ready. Remember, you can rest on your forehead as well. Big inhale, big exhale to empty the lungs. And then inhaling to fill the abdomen. When the abdomen is full, breath spills to the rib cage. When the rib cage is full, breath spills to the upper chest and shoulders. We empty the lungs from top to bottom. Inhaling belly, ribs, and chest. Exhaling chest, ribs, abdomen. Keeping the jaw and neck relaxed as you continue to focus on your breathing. Five more breaths. With your next exhalation, returning to the natural breath. Slowly bringing the elbows in front of you and reaching your fingertips towards the ceiling, resting the arms beside you next. And slowly walk your feet together. You might have the urge to hug the legs, maybe rock a little from side to side, maybe make a few circles, thinking about that neutral pelvis while you're here. Change the grip of the hands, change the direction of the circles, and go side to side one more time. And then come back to center, bringing one foot and then the other to the floor, extending the arms, extending the legs, and resting in your Shavasana. And please remain as long as is available to you. 7 to 10 minutes is ideal. 7 to 15 minutes, if you happen to have the time available, is fantastic. And finish your Shavasana in your own time. Thank you for sharing your practice. with me today. Namaste.